to Global Spiritual Revolution Radio and Media Group here in New York. You can call us in right now at 929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that is 929-477-3997. Now, if you live outside of the continental United States of America, you can call us in right now at 1-929-477-3997. Again, beloved, that's 1-929-477-3997. We are nationally syndicated through the Talk America Radio Network out of Dallas, Texas. Now, beloved, the Talk America Radio Network is indeed the new dominant force in conservative talk radio, and we are also so blessed to be a part of the global media conglomerate of the iHeart Radio Network in the iHeart Media Group in New York City, New York, 929-477-3997. You can also send us your questions via email tonight at globalspiritualrevolutionradio@yahoo.com. Again, beloved, Global Spiritual Revolution Radio at yahoo.com. I have been waiting for this moment for a short period of time, but this very unique topic entitled The Obama Conspiracy, the Manufacturing of a President, Part 2, here with America's #1 political scientist. And I believe this man of God is the most powerful teacher that I have ever heard in 35 years of global ministry here through Global Spiritual Revolution Radio, and that is the Honorable Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, world-renowned attorney, political scientist, the founder and the president of the Sefer Publishing Group there in Eureka, Montana. And please go to their website right now at www.sefer.net. Again, that's Sefer, capital CEPHER.net. And get out your credit cards right now, your American Express, your Visa, your MasterCard, and your Discover card, and purchase the F. Sefer. I'm telling you, this divine book is indeed the greatest and the most scholarly created document when it comes to restoring the sacred scriptures back to the original Hebraic and Aramaic translations. All right, Dr. Stephen, thank you so much, sir, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be back with us here tonight on Global Spiritual Revolution Radio.
Well, Bishop, it's always just a great pleasure to be with you and to be discussing these topics. I want to thank you again for asking me to come on the air with you.
It is such a great honor, and I am so excited. And I'm telling you, I just personally found out some other connections that this person, Barack Hussein Obama, in his mindset had, and to all African Americans out there, you should know concerning the history of the Moorish Science Temple there in Chicago, Illinois, going back to the early 1920s. And this man by the name of Noble Drew Ali, who created later the Nation of Islam, and from whence Barack Obama's mindset and connection is rooted in. And we're going to expose that tonight. And near the end of the broadcast, I'm going to expose that because this is heavy. All right, a man of God, can you lead us into the mind of God in prayer before tonight's discussion?
Yes, let us come together as brothers and sisters before the heavenly throne and bring our petitions to He who hears and to He who answers. And so let us bow our heads now and agree here that Heavenly Father, we come together this evening. We come together this evening really with heavy hearts that we would be discussing such the great tragedy that has unfolded over the United States over these last 70 years. And that as we look at the many things and the many paths that we have walked down as a nation, it seems that we've had the blinders on, unable to find the narrow path to righteousness, and have wandered on every diverse pathway, every diverse branch of the tree of knowledge of good and evil we have followed as a people. And as a result, we sit with calamity before us and really on all sides, and a heavy weight lingers over the back of our neck now as a result of the harvest coming home. And so we look to you now. We bring our petitions to you. First of all, a petition of repentance to say, hear our cries of repentance as we turn to look at you, as we seek with all our heart, with all our mind, all our soul, to find you, to seek you and find you, to know that you are here waiting for us, that you have always contemplated our being here. And we come back to you now like prodigal sons, saying we are not worthy to be in your kingdom, but yet we are here. For we have nowhere else to go. And you have seen this from the beginning. And as you see this, your people petition you now as your remnant. Your people petition you as voices in the wilderness, crying out and saying, hear us, hear us. For who can praise you from the grave, O Yah? We stand before you now. We lift our petitions to you. And we say, hear our voice of repentance in this place and help us to turn. Strengthen us with your grace and with your mercy. May your spirit be among us. May your mighty ruach move among us as like a healing wind, a healing breath. Call your people back to you and give us this ultimate harmony with you in all things as we embrace your walk across our nation. May your will be done in this place, not our will, but may your will be done in this place. May you claim this land as your own. May you punish and destroy the houses of Babylon and raise up the house of Israel again. Lift up your people, lift up your people that we may come back to praise you. And strengthen us now, and as we look at the adversaries joining against us, gather us together tonight as one people in one voice, as brothers and sisters before you, claiming your name and proclaiming and declaring your name as being no name under heaven by which men may otherwise be saved, as you have walked among us and as you have so declared. And so we lift this night to you with all honor and all glory, giving this evening to you. May we be a blessing to you in our speech and in our minds and in our message. May we convey the truth that you would desire us to speak. Be with us in these things. We lift this to you now in the name of our glorious Savior and our Rock and Redeemer and our Messiah. Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Pidgeon. 929-477-3997. And as a radio host, I never like to play sides or favorites, but I have to confess Dr. Stephen Pidgeon is my favorite person to interview. And I am so honored to have him back tonight. All right, Obama conspiracy, the manufacturing of a president, part 2. Look what is going on even today with the deep state. There is a secret society in the FBI, James Comey, Loretta Lynch, Sally Yates, of course, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Andrew McCabe resigning. You got this couple, Bruce and Nellie Orr, Lisa Page and her lover Peter Strzok, Glenn R. Simpson, Bill Priestap of Fusion GPS. But it seems like as we unlayer this Obama conspiracy, the manufacturing of a president, that this present-day deep state house of cards is crumbling. Man of God, the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you, Bishop. As we look at the deep state, and as we look out now, just recently in the last couple of days, there have been two portraits that have been released at the Smithsonian, a portrait of Barack Obama and his wife, Michelle. And both of these portraits are inordinate. They're unusual. They do not meet with the congruency of the other paintings of the presidents who have sat in the office of the White House. And I think there's a reason for that. In fact, the painting of Barack Obama has a background, has him sitting instead of standing, which has its own message, by the way, that he is a sitting president, right? And what the rest of us would understand when you say that phrase is that the president is still in office. He's a sitting president, that the president is still in office. And interestingly enough, the background on that painting is a painting of, it appears to be some kind of wildlife or greenage or foliage, but it was put together out of really a Photoshop of restating of the same image over and over and over again. A lot of people have criticized it and said it's very cheesy or cheap, but it's totally consistent with what we find in his three renditions of his birth certificate, also staged from Photoshop in every instance. And so you've got a very interesting legacy here that's being set forth concerning this man who goes by the alias Barack Hussein Obama. It's not his real name. It's not his birth name. It's not his adopted name. It's not his legal name. Now, with that being said, I do want to kind of go a little bit astray here to say there was one piece of evidence that I found when I was drafting the book, The Obama Error. And as I was doing it, I found this image of a name change that had taken place in British Columbia. And I am very familiar with British Columbian certified documents like birth certificates and marriage licenses and so forth. And this one had the indicia of a British Columbian cert. It was brown, it had the state seal, etc. And it showed a name change from the name Barack Munir Ubayed to the name Barack Hussein Obama. And this name change took place in 1982. Now, there was another name change that was also given to the fellow who went by Barack Hussein Obama when he was adopted by the tribes in Montana, and they gave him this very long and elaborate Indian name or Native American name, tribal name. And, okay, that's probably the most accurate name he has, frankly. But when you see, when we talk about it, and some of the people that are in counter intel, and you have to remember that everything that we publish online, and Bishop, I know you have been going through a lot. Because you have the courage and the tenacity to unearth really deep, dark secrets of what's actually happening in this country. You know, you've gone through a lot of, shall we say, technical sabotage, among other things. We know what happened recently as a result of an NFL lawyer coming forward and saying, having a discussion about the improprieties within the league there in New York.
Yes.
And we also know what just recently happened in Moscow at the Domodedovo airport with that flight off to Orsk, where upon takeoff, they claim an airspeed indicator went bad. And an airspeed indicator, which has nothing to do with an engine, causes the right engine to blow up. Conveniently, there were 2 critical people in Uranium-1 that were on board that plane that died in that flight, along with 69 other souls who had families and loved ones. And a great tragedy, really, like any plane crash is. But this one even more tragic because it appears to be a flight that went down by intentional means. That is to say, a flight of sabotage directed towards killing critical people on board. So, with that being said, we continue to see the deep state exact casualties. We continue to see the deep state continue to protect over and over again, to protect their narrative, to promote their narrative, and furthermore, to place their chess pieces on the board in such a way that it forces the hand of the American government, to engage in war in Syria, forces the hand of the American government to go to war with Iran or with North Korea, or possibly even China. But now we have some events that I think are biblical in nature, that is to say there's scriptural foundation, prophetic foundation for where we have arrived in this country. And Barack Hussein Obama, the sitting president in that portrait, continues to assert himself on the world stage as the true leader of the United States. So President Trump will go to negotiate something with China. Barack Obama will follow and say that isn't the deal at all. He'll go to Europe, try to negotiate something. Barack Obama will come in and say that's not the situation at all. I'm telling you what the true story is, because Mr. Obama's assertion is throughout the world, I am the true president of the deep state. I am still in control. I still, control the mechanisms in the echelons of power in the United States. And you can see that by the fact that they're getting ready to stage a false flag in Syria. Again, this has been manipulated with the French leadership. And what has happened is the Russians have come out and said, we know that al-Nusra has moved chlorine gas into Syria, and they're intending a gas attack in the city of Idlib, and they're preparing it. The White Helmets are moving in, which of course is a UN predatory force controlled by the Vatican. The White Helmets are moving in, al-Nusra is moving in, and they've moved the chlorine gas in. And then once they got the gas into position, and the Russians have tracked all of this and have publicized it, then the French come out and say, if there is a gas attack in Syria, we're coming in. To give a little bit of a history behind that, remember that when the Ottoman Empire collapsed and suffered the fatal head wound back in World War I in 1917 with the loss of Jerusalem, well, they did not only lose Jerusalem, but they were forced to redraw the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire to now be only modern Turkey. Modern Turkey is all that remains of the Ottoman Empire, at least from a political point of view. They lost the caliphate. The caliph was gone. They called it the fatal head wound. And the area that they used to control, that used to reach all the way down to the bottom of Saudi Arabia and Yemen and Kuwait, all of those oil exporting countries now, were all independent nations. And there was an area called the Levant. And the Levant was controlled by the Allies, that is to say Britain and France. And Britain and France reached an agreement, and they took out a ruler, and they kind of drew a line, and they said, okay, everything south of Turkey that runs to the essentially the Euphrates River, from this line right here, is going to be controlled by the French. So Lebanon and Syria controlled by the French government. And that which was south of that, which was called the Transjordan, was controlled by Britain. And Britain literally took out a ruler and said, this is Iraq, this is Kuwait, this is Jordan, and this is Israel. And so the French have always had an interest in Syria and in Lebanon. So when the Lebanese Civil War broke out, it was very interesting because I think it was Fox News that showed the French making a beachhead in Beirut, and I think maybe 2006. And when the French beachhead consisted of 6 guys coming ashore in a Zodiac carrying champagne and brie, right? Pretty funny beachhead. But now it's not funny anymore because the French are prepared to use, of course, the fighter aircraft to bring the aircraft carrier to bear, put troops on the ground, and to actively kill people. And they are looking for the chance to assert French control again over Syria for the purposes of removing Assad. Part of that machination, a great part of those backroom deals that are being discussed with Barack Obama giving the go-ahead and giving permission to rogue elements in the deep state to do overt and covert operations in Syria using al-Nusra, using the remnant of ISIS, and so on and so forth in that region. And in addition, President Trump has worked very diligently to block Mr. Obama's ability to use a terrorist force in the United States. And when we think about this, let's just take a look at this for just 1 second. Because President Trump is well informed that MS-13 gang members, the most violent gang in the world, had been gathered in the United States for purposes of executing terrorism on behalf and at the will of the deep state, or at least rogue elements of the deep state. And he said that, and when he came up in his State of the Union address, he said, these guys are enemies of the state. MS-13 are enemies of the state. We're going to arrest them. We're going to deport them, or we may even put them in Guantanamo. But it was very important that he made it very clear that he was taking steps against MS-13. He also knew, because we were, let's just say I was associated with the group that had provided the intelligence to the National Security Council concerning American passports that had been delivered to the rogue government in Libya. And again, this was done on behalf of Mr. Obama before he gave up the office. He transferred the means to create American passports and American green cards into the rogue elements of this government in Libya. And they were actively creating American diplomatic records for ISIS leadership so that when the ISIS campaign failed in Syria, they could come into Libya, get an American passport for them and their whole family, and in addition to that, they were being given $4 million in cash per family and then shipped into the United States on UPS cargo planes where they wouldn't have to face any kind of TSA or any kind of customs when they entered the country. Now, this was well publicized, and when President Trump said, well, you know what, I'm going to put in a travel ban from these countries where we know that these players are getting fake green cards and artificial passports and are getting American diplomatic records, I'm going to put a ban on their coming into the country for 120 days until we can figure out who's getting what and where. And it was operatives of the deep state, including operatives out here in the state of Washington where I live, that walked into court and said, we need an injunction to block the President of the United States from executing a foreign policy that would keep international terrorists out of our borders and who were being imported on behalf of Obama and his people. And the judge, in his infinite wisdom, said, oh, yeah, well, I don't see any incidents of terrorism here. Well, just a minute, Your Honor, before you decide that there's no incidents of terrorism. Have you been briefed by the NSA? Have you been briefed by the FBI? Have you been briefed by the CIA? Have you been briefed by the DOD and military intel? Have you been debriefed by the National Security Council? Have you been debriefed? Oh, no. You don't have any of that on your desk, do you? None of that. Felt free as a U.S. District Court to assert your judicial authority, which is a judge in a limited jurisdiction federal court, over the President of the United States to say, I am stopping you from exacting foreign policy in the hands of the executive branch. Now, that judge and the Ninth Circuit that endorsed his decision were summarily reversed 9-0 by the United States Supreme Court. Why that judge remains on the bench is a mystery to me. But you see that the deep state operatives were working to protect the undercover militant terrorist network that was being developed in support of the shadow government that is trying to be maintained by Barack Obama. Now, bear in mind, that shadow government is continuing as we speak, continues to manipulate, he continues to push forward, he continues to openly interfere with American foreign policy. And from a lawyer's point of view, Bishop, there are several federal laws on point. One law is called the Logan Act that prohibits him, as a matter of federal law, from being able to go offshore and make any representation on behalf of the United States without committing a federal felony. And he's made many of them. And yet, who's going to arrest him? James Comey? Robert Mueller? Andrew McCabe? Who's going to arrest him? Who's going to indict him? And so when we see these 13,000 sealed indictments that are currently sitting before the Department of Justice, all in place against people who could not stop themselves from acting in a partisan manner after the President of the United States was duly elected, popular vote, and the Electoral College, and sworn in to office as an American citizen, they still could not stop their partisan activities on behalf of the deep state for purpose of wielding power on behalf of what I would have to call a Fourth Reich regime of this New World Order, which is intent upon destroying the United States. So this is our initial background in terms of where we are with Barack Obama. He is not gone yet. Very important to recognize that point. Because when we talk now, when I was mentioning to you before that we see prophetic implications in what are here, the world now, and I think we're coming to a real apex of time here in 2018. On one hand, it would be nice, like Mark Taylor says, to look at this thing and say, well, the glass is, half full, and we can look at this and say the economy is going to improve and this is going to happen and that's going to happen. I do believe that the policies that President Trump has put in place right now, and I mean, quite frankly, I was cheering during the State of the Union address for about half the address, because he has done things that I know in my heart are going to work to benefit the economy and to benefit this country, with the reinstatement of real jobs, with the return of some manufacturing, with him luring investment back into the country, with major tax reform that opens the door for corporations to function here, with the liberating of coal and the liberating of oil so that we can become energy independent. All these things are so critically and important to the viability of the nation. And so Mr. Trump has set these things in motion, but the damage that Mr. Obama did is so enormous, and most Americans don't appreciate it because there has been a willing propaganda press that refused to report on the damages he had done. We couldn't get the truth from the so-called media. And so what you see is that when we had 100 million people out of work, there was a point during the first term of Mr. Obama where the unemployment rate out here in Washington was 28%. And nationwide, it was about 23%. Nobody wanted to calculate that because they only calculated who was collecting unemployment benefits, not who were working Americans who did not have employment. And then the ones that did get employed got employed in part-time jobs, contract positions, whatever position they could make so that the employer did not have to pay for Obamacare. which the Supreme Court readily admitted was a tax. And so what we see here is that Mr. Obama came in to a political situation where the country was almost $7 trillion in debt when he entered office. When he left, we were $21 trillion in debt. Wow. He created, there were 100 million people out of work. He shut down the coal industry. He shut down most manufacturing in the country. And he proceeded to create a socialist paradise where the schools were openly teaching socialism and communism. And most of our young people who grew up in that generation, and I have 3 children who grew up in the Bush-Obama years, they don't remember anything before 9/11. And so for most of their young adult life, it was Obama for 8 long years. And so the expectation has been, where's my handout? I'm going to get government this and government that and government the other thing. And so you talk to the millennials now, all of them want to live in Denmark. They don't mind the idea of paying an 85% income tax. They don't want cars. They want to live in a pack and stack environment over some subway that allows them to work in a tech job. They have no expectation of privacy, no expectation of any of the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. And all of this was done intentionally. There was a memorandum that surfaced in the 1980s that was a memorandum of the Muslim Brotherhood. And that memorandum talked about there would be an initial violent approach at overthrowing the United States, but that wouldn't be how the United States would be overthrown. They would wage economic jihad on the country. And that economic jihad that they used, of course, was the Saul Alinsky protocol, which was to push as many people as possible into the public welfare rules and then to drive the cost of public welfare through the ceiling in order to bankrupt the currency and to bankrupt the nation. And quite frankly, we've reached that point. And I know a lot of people looked at the market, when President Trump was giving his State of the Union address, the Dow Jones was at an all-time record high. Never been that high before, not in an actual number. But no sooner was the State of the Union address complete, we saw a 666-point drop. Interesting number. We saw that 666-point drop followed by 1175, followed by a small recovery, followed by another 1,025. And we have entered into, in my opinion, and again, I'm not a financial analyst, but in my opinion, we have entered into a steep, short bear market. Now, when I say short, I'm talking about I see us in a bear market for the next 2 years with the potential of almost a 90% correction in stock valuation and bond valuation. There's going to be a flight for the hills. And once this correction is over, we're going to be looking at a very precarious situation economically. That is to say, we will have entered into another Great Depression, similar to the one in the 1930s. Now, fortunately, President Trump has put so many things in place right now in expectation of this Great Depression coming in, that we have the mechanisms to begin rebuilding a real economy on top of this. But as many of the prophetic people will say, the pressure is mounting and the pressure is rising to require a debt jubilee. Now, from a prophetic view, that would be consistent with the declaration of a jubilee year on Yom Kippur in 2017, which was October 1st. October 1st was an extremely significant day. It was the day of the Las Vegas shooting. It was also 8 days following the appearance of the Revelation 12 sign in the heavens, where the woman had given birth to the male child, and the dragon was there to consume the child. The archangel Michael was at war with the dragon. All of that sign, the Revelation 12 sign, was seen in the heavens, consistent with the teaching in Matthew 24, when Mashiach says, you will see the sign of the coming of the Son of Man. The sign of the coming of the Son of Man. Not the coming of the Son of Man, but the sign of his coming. And so we saw that on September 23rd, 8 days prior to Yom Kippur on October 1st. On October 1st, there's a blood sacrifice in Las Vegas, significant proportion, all of which is continuing to be covered up. But we still don't have the whole truth on what happened in Las Vegas. There's all kinds of discussion about what that is. You and I talked about it. But that particular day is consistent with the Luke 4 declaration when the Messiah walks into the synagogue. And it's very interesting in Luke 4, it says, and he came and on the Sabbath went into the synagogue to teach as was his custom. And he went in, and, usually in the synagogues, particularly on the Sabbath, you have a Torah teaching. It's called the Parshat. And the Torah teaching, the Parshat, there's a particular portion that is read that allows the whole of the Torah to be read over a year. And so you read 1/52nd, if you will, or 1/53rd of the Torah in this Torah portion. And then typically the rabbis would teach on the Torah portion. Now there is an additional reading besides the Parshat that is called the Haftorah. And the Haftorah is the reading of the prophets. And usually it's not all the prophets. It's usually Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zechariah would be the Parshat readings. But there are certain Parshat readings that are never read in the synagogue. I mean, one of those Parshat readings would, of course, be Isaiah 53 because it's a bit too messianic. And so many Jews go their whole life without ever hearing Isaiah 53. But in this particular case, this was Isaiah 61. And the first 10 verses of Isaiah 61 are never read in a Parshat. They're never read in a Parshat. And the reason they're not read in the Parshat is because it declares the year of the Jubilee. So Mashiach walks in and he opens up and he says, I'm not going to do the Torah teaching here. I'm going to read a Haftorah, and this Haftorah is going to be, and he says they handed him the scroll of Isaiah, and he opened up the scroll and he said, the Ruach Adonai Yahweh is upon me because Yahweh has anointed me to preach the Besorah unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of Yah. Now that's all Jubilee language. And so when he proclaimed the Jubilee, this set forth a series of motions. And because the Jubilee was unknown, remember that the house of Israel had stopped practicing the sabbatical year as soon as Saul, or Shaul was his name, became the first king. As soon as he became king, that was the end of the sabbatical year. Even though Moses had told them, the land will practice the sabbatical year even if you don't. The people ignored it, and so Saul becomes the king, and when he becomes the king, they go for 490 years without ever keeping the sabbatical year. Well, if they didn't keep the sabbatical year, you can rest assured they didn't keep the Jubilee year in the 50-year sequence either. And in 586, the Babylonian captivity took place. And when the Babylonian captivity took place, they took the majority of Israel out and took them to Babylon for a 70-year period. And in First Chronicles, it's recorded. In Second Chronicles, it says that the 70 years were accomplished for all of the Sabbath years that they did not keep. There were 70 sabbatical years that they did not keep. So that was a 490-year period. And that was the reason for the 70-year captivity. Now, I can tell you that Russia had a 70-year famine of the word, and we, too, in America have had a 70-year famine of the word from 1948 to 2018. We've had a famine of the word. Russia had a 60 million person Holocaust. We've had a 60 million person Holocaust. And so the judgments have been upon this country. And it is up to the remnant now, it is up to those who are hearing the word to turn their hearts and repent and return to the narrow path, return to the way, the truth, and the life. And with that return, he will hear our prayer and he will heal the land. but it takes that return. And in the meantime, we have been preyed upon by the Assyrian. Now, you were talking about earlier here, Bishop, that's something you're going to bring up, which I think is going to be very good. Because we have to understand that Barack Obama is Muslim through and through.
Yes.
And the people who try to deny this, like George Stephanopoulos, Barack Obama doesn't deny it, but Stephanopoulos does on his behalf. Even at Jeremiah Wright's church there in South Chicago, they had Louis Farrakhan and other Islamic teachers teach from that pulpit in that church. Very important point. And remember that under Islam, you have this idea of taqiyya. And taqiyya under Islam is a premise that says you can lie to the infidel about everything. You can lie to them about being a Christian and so on and so forth because they're infidels. They're not deserving of the truth. The only thing you can't do as a Muslim is to denounce Muhammad and to denounce Allah. But everything else you could say, oh, yeah, I believe in Jesus and, I'm a Christian and all this other stuff. You can give all that rhetoric until the cows come home. That's perfectly passable under the doctrine of taqiyya. Now, there's another concept in Islam that's called the Jizya. Now, the Jizya is a fine that is placed on the infidel that the Muslim does not have to pay. And so you had ISIS impose the Jizya there in northern Iraq in a ferocious way. So they would tell the people, look, you're either going to pay this tax or you're going to convert to Islam or we're going to behead you. It's one of those three. Well, what's the tax? Well, it's 10 ounces of gold per person per year. Now, at that time, that would have been about $18,000 per person. So if you're a husband and wife and you've got 2 kids, that's $72,000 a year tax to keep from being beheaded. Well, you might look at that number and say, well, that's pretty outrageous. All right. Well, let's take a look at Obamacare. Now, Obamacare, you recall, Nancy Pelosi said, we need to pass it to see what's in it, which, as you know, is the medical definition of a stool sample. But nonetheless, she is the one that raised this issue. Nobody read the bill, 2,600 pages long. And once you look at it, you still can't find the jizya in that bill because you have to look to the Treasury regs to find it. And under the Treasury regs, because believe me, Obamacare is a tax. That's what the Supreme Court called it, a tax. And under Obamacare, the Treasury regs read that if you're a member of a religion that has for at least 50 years been opposed to insurance, well, then you don't have to pay the Obamacare penalties. And they believed at that time that they passed that reg that there was only one religion in the country that qualified, which was Islam. Which they didn't know was that the Amish also did not believe in insurance. Once they discovered that the Amish didn't believe in insurance, they began persecuting the Amish leadership to try to destroy the Amish community. However, now let's look at this. So what is the penalty for not paying into Obamacare per family? $4,000 a month. So at the end of the year, you're paying a $48,000 jizya that the Muslim that was imported into this country that may not even have a green card is not paying. So, did Mr. Obama impose the jizya? Yes, he did. Did he wage economic war on the country? A lot of Americans don't know that at one point during the Obama regime, the Federal Reserve $1 trillion and put it into European banks without alerting Congress, without getting permission from Congress or permission from anyone else. They're a private entity. All they did was put 16 and a few zeros behind it to make sure that Paribas and Deutsche Bank and some of the Swiss banks remained solvent. 16 trillion. At that time, that was the total deficit of the United States.
Wow.
No one calculates that currency transfer because it was made off the books. Mr. Obama didn't provide a budget to Congress for 5 years. And so you see that this battle plan that was announced by the Muslim Brotherhood, a group that Mr. Obama declared he was one of at his speech in Egypt in Cairo in April of 2009. You can get a copy of the speech on YouTube right now. And you can listen to him speak Arabic at the end of the speech and extol the virtues of the Quran throughout the majority of that speech. The Holy Quran teaches this, the Holy Quran teaches that. And so we have somebody who is executing Islamic jihad against the economy of the United States, who sat in the Oval Office doing it, and who, by the way, had no lawful right to be in that Oval Office because he couldn't establish his American citizenship. He couldn't establish his natural birth. And he still has not done so. Now, there's some more interesting things that have surfaced on this portrait. He's sitting on a chair, and on the face of that chair, there is some lettering written. And again, at the end of that lettering, I'm seeing the letters AH. In fact, what I see at the very far right on that chair is 44 AH. Now, if 44 AH is what I think it is, we still may be talking about Joanna Ani and her birth date.
Wow. Teach, man of God. Wow.
So here we go again, right? And so again, what we see here is we start to see who this fellow is and his cultivation. Now, if people knew his cultivation, I don't know what would happen, frankly, because I think there are many Americans who see him the way he was portrayed when he was elected in 2008 as the Messiah. There were entertainers that openly called him the Messiah. There was a prayer. The Our Father was written in his name, and he was declared the Messiah. And this is why I'm saying that where Mr. Obama is concerned, he still considers himself the sitting president. He has not accepted the presidency of President Trump. He does not accept the Constitution of this country as being controlling whatsoever. He believes the deep state still controls it, and he believes that he's better entrenched in the deep state than President Trump. Now, let's take a look for just a minute, if we can, Bishop.
Yes.
There is an interesting prophecy that has been discussed, but it's actually a curse that was declared upon this nation by our leaders who, in their ignorance, declared this curse over America, not knowing it was a curse, which is this curse that appears where? It begins in Isaiah 9:9, but the curse begins to unfold. The active portions of the curse begin to unfold in Isaiah 9:11. So what you see here in 9:9, it says, "And all the people shall know, even Ephraim and the inhabitant of Shamron, that say in the pride and the stoutness of their heart," quote, "The bricks are fallen, but we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down, but we will change them into cedars." Now, in the Septuagint calls this a word of death that has landed on Ephraim. And it says, "The bricks have fallen, we will build with hewn stones. The sycamores are cut down. Come, let us build a tower." All of this particular passage, Isaiah 9:10, was read into the congressional record by Tom Daschle on September 12, 2001. It was reiterated by presidential candidate John Edwards in 2004. It was adopted by George Bush, by George Pataki, by Mayor Giuliani, and ultimately Barack Obama signed the final beam we will rebuild stronger on the Freedom Tower in New York City. Cornerstone for the foundation was a hewn stone from Connecticut, and we did, in fact, bronze the sycamore tree that was in front of the St. Paul's Church there across the street from the World Trade Center that got knocked down. We cut the roots off and bronzed it. They sit down there by the Bull down on Wall Street. And there was a cedar, in fact, planted in front of that church, which has long since died. This was a curse that was proclaimed. Now, people don't want to know this curse, and I've taught on this curse, many, many times. But this curse has a particular unfolding. It's got an unfolding, and this unfolding is before us. And I'll give you an example. 9:11, Isaiah 9:11. Therefore, Yah shall set up the adversaries of Retzin against him and join his enemies together. Okay. Well, the enemies, who's Retzin? That's Syria. So Yah is going to set up the adversaries of Syria against him and join his enemies together. Okay, well, this has happened. This has totally happened. And so then it says, who's going to be the enemies of Ephraim here? Who's going to be the enemies of us? So who's going to be the enemies of the people who claim this curse? Well, the Syrians and the Palestinians. The Syrians in front, the Palestinians behind. And they shall devour Yasharel with open mouth. Okay, that's just premise number one. Now you go down, you keep going, and you have more and more and more and more. We may have talked about this before, but it says here in 9:14, Yah will cut off from Yasharel the head and the tail, the branch and the rush in one day. Now, this has happened. The head, it says, the ancient and the honorable are the head. Look what's happened. There's no ancient and honorable to mentor the young people anymore. Where are the people that knew what journalism integrity was?
Right.
Those guys are long since gone. And all we have are the graduates from journalism school who are taught how to regurgitate the propaganda that's put in front of them.
Right.
Where are the ancient and the honorable in the school system? They're all gone. And instead we moved into, the brainwash academy with people touting the far left, New World Order, communist, eugenicist order. And so it goes. Now, it also says that the prophet that teaches lies, he is the tail. Well, who do we have that's teaching us lies if it isn't a reporter on CNN? It's just, the fake news stuff that's out here, Bishop, and it's just one after another after another of people mouthing. And you know what I found, Bishop? I have to tell you. When you look at the media reporting, the very first thing that comes out of their mouth is the biggest lie they're going to tell you when they're talking about a particular story.
Right.
Right? That's where they hide the biggest part of the lie, is right in the very first statement. And if they can do it in the first word, they will do it. And so, as Americans, we are the least informed people on earth. And you have to look offshore. You have to go to some media source offshore to try to get any semblance of the truth whatsoever, unless you're listening to underground media here. And when we talk about underground radio, we're talking about Blog Talk Radio, we're talking about iHeartRadio, we're talking about Global Spiritual Radio. You're talking about places that they can no longer control.
Right.
And which is the only place people can get their news, right? And so, but then he says, look, even after this, even after the ancient and honorable gone, and even the prophets with lies are gone, his hand is stretched out still. He's not done. Now, when we get down here to the end of 9, it says, Manasseh and Ephraim and Manasseh, they will be against each other, and they together shall be against Judah. For in all this his anger is not turned away. Now, Manasseh, when I look at the tribal movements, I have concluded that Manasseh as a country is Russia. Because the blessing in Genesis 48 said Manasseh would be a great nation. Singular, a great nation. But Ephraim would be a great company of nations. Now, Ephraim is the English-speaking world. Manasseh is Russia. And that's where the eastern side of Manasseh went, that tribe. They migrated up into Mongolia. Then the Khan came out and he conquered all of Russia and all the way into Europe before retreating. And eventually that kingdom was overcome by the leadership in Moscow or Vladimir. And they eventually overcame that and created Russia. But that state is predominantly, from a spiritual sense, Manasseh. The English-speaking world, from a spiritual sense, is Ephraim. And who's at odds with one another? Manasseh against Ephraim, Ephraim against Manasseh, and now both of us are turning against Judah. But when we get over here into chapter 10, we're going to see this prophecy about Mr. Obama. Now, again, not knowing Mr. Obama's origins, and who knows what his origins are. It boggles my mind, frankly, that the guy can get into Harvard Law School and he can have his publicist come out and say, for 17 years in a row, I was born in Kenya, 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 until he begins to run for the presidency of the United States. Oh, I was born in Hawaii, I was born in Hawaii. At a place that didn't exist, with a citizenship that didn't exist. Okay, so then he admits on his face that his father was not an American citizen, disqualified as a matter of constitutional law. And all of the mass media and all of the deep state operatives that were sitting in all of the courts in this country, there were over 50 lawsuits brought to challenge that position, and there wasn't a single judge that ever heard it on the merits. Not one. We posted 200 paragraphs of reasons why, of the felony crimes of Barack Obama, and put it in front of the Judiciary Committee of the House of Representatives 2.5 years before Obama's final term. Not one of them would introduce those articles. Not one. A lot of lip service going on, but nobody would introduce them. And you have his own admission, but let's assume that his story was true, that Barack Obama was his father. Well, Barack Obama had an interesting father. And his father was growing up in the British Protectorate of East Africa, not Kenya. And as a young man in the 30s, decided, I need to get some work here. And so he left, and he went where? He went to work in what at that time was called Palestine. And he was working up north of the Sea of Galilee. And he took a wife from one of the tribes living north of the Sea of Galilee. Well, if you recall, if you go back and you study the biblical history a little bit, you'll know that there was a civil war between Solomon, Rehoboam, and Jeroboam of the northern kingdom, and the kingdoms split. The 10 northern tribes were in the north, and you had Benjamin, Judah, and Levi in the south. In the northern kingdoms, Assyria conquered them in 722. They took all the remaining tribes that were there, and they took them captive, and they took them back to the east of what is now modern-day Mosul, but at that time was called Nineveh. They took them back to the east of Nineveh. Well, then they took Assyrian people, and they moved them into that area, into the northern kingdom. Those people, many of those people were called Samaritans. But they were Assyrians. And so Barack Obama, the Kenyan, who the father of Barack Hussein Obama, according to his testimony, his father married an Assyrian woman. That means that the mtDNA of Assyria passed down through to the grandson. In other words, he qualifies as an Assyrian. Now, with that being said, let's take a look. And that's just physically speaking. We're talking about the spiritual Assyrian is another matter. Now, if you look at Isaiah 10:5, O Ashur, that's another name for Assyrian. The rod of my anger and the staff in his hand is my indignation. So this is the Father telling us I've raised up this Assyrian, and the staff in his hand and the rod of anger that he's going to wield is the staff of indignation that belongs to the Father. I will send him against a hypocritical nation. Now, who would that be? And against the people of my wrath will I give him charge to take the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Well, that's exactly what he did. He took the spoil, he took the prey. He took all of the wealth of the nation for generations and spent it. Howbeit he does not mean so, neither does his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and to cut off nations and not a few. All right, Mr. Nobel Peace Prize winner. Let's talk about the nations where he waged war.
Right.
You know, at one point he sent a drone to a wedding ceremony to kill 200 family members of one terrorist that he wanted to kill. He sent drones to kill the family members of a terrorist who were attending the funeral of that terrorist that he had just killed days before. He was openly using drones to kill people in Pakistan and in Yemen and in Somalia and in Sudan. He openly attacked Libya. He orchestrated a terrorist overthrow of Syria. He was engaged in warfare in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and then put together the Arab Spring, which began in Tunisia, spread to Egypt, to Libya, to the Sudan, to Yemen, to Bahrain, and even approached Jordan and Syria. He was responsible for the displacement of 3.5 million people. There's been over 1 million deaths in Syria. There's been almost 250,000 deaths in Libya, not counting the casualties in Pakistan and Afghanistan. Peace, he initiated more wars than any president in history. Okay? But he says, no, but this prophecy is not over, right? And if you think about it, if you remember what ISIS did, remember that he funded, trained, deployed, and supported ISIS. There's no question. He and Hillary Clinton supplied 200,000 tons of munitions to them.
Yes.
Including these shoulder-fired missiles, these man-pads. Now, who knows if it wasn't a man-pad that took that plane down in Russia? I don't know. But I can tell you that they imported 157 of those man-pads into the United States here just 2 weeks ago when they brought in ISIS terrorists on a plane. So anyway, we'll leave that for what it is. However, one of the things that they did was they destroyed all the idols up there in Iraq and in Syria, and they were tearing down stuff that had been around, 2,500, 3,000 years. Oh, blow that statue up. We don't like that. Tear down that gate. We don't want that. Rip that temple up. Blah blah blah. It was incredible, right? Now, if you look here in this passage in Isaiah, he says, hey, isn't Samaria just like Damascus, as my hand has found the kingdom of the idols, whose graven images did excel those of Jerusalem and Samaria? Shall I not, as I have done unto Samaria and her idols, also do to Jerusalem? So this prophecy is not over yet. This prophecy is not over yet. Okay? Now, for he says, this is what the Assyrian is saying in his own heart. Now, tell me if you think this is consistent with the personality of Barack Obama. By the strength of my hand I have done it, and by my wisdom, for I am prudent.
Yes.
I have removed the bounds of the people. I have robbed their treasures, and I have put down their inhabitants like a valiant man. Now, listen to this one, Bishop. Tell me what you think. This is Isaiah 10, verse 14. And my hand has found as a nest the riches of these people, and as one who gathers eggs that are left, I have gathered all the earth, and there was none that moved the wing or opened the mouth or even peeped.
Teach God.
Right? Nobody
That's
said a word. Yeah.
Right.
Now, I can tell you that ultimately, this prophecy concludes with what will happen eventually, which is that in verse 16 it says, "Therefore Adonai, Yahweh Sebaot, shall send among his fat ones leanness, and under his glory he shall kindle a burning like the burning of a fire. And the light of Yasharel shall be for a fire, and the Holy One for a flame, and it shall burn and devour his thorns and briars in one day." So we see that it's not over yet. But ultimately, the destruction of this king of Babylon, of this Assyrian, of this one who comes to destroy, will be at the hands of the Father, not us. It will be the Holy One of Israel who will consume him as a fire. And so, when we look at this prophecy, now we can take a look and see that the Muslim protocol that was introduced by Obama is also consistent with the prophecy in Daniel 11. He shall have no desire for women, and he shall worship a God that his fathers did not know. No, you're talking about his political fathers, right? Because when you look at his fathers, let's talk about his fathers for a minute. He has multiple candidates. Some of them I think are entirely discredited. I think there are psyops that have been put out there to try to keep people off the trail, like the Frank Marshall Davis claim. I think he knew Frank Marshall Davis, and Frank Marshall Davis was a active member of the Communist Party in Hawaii, and he was also a pornographer. But in terms of him being the father, no, it's not possible. And there's also some claim that he was the son of somebody in Kansas. Well, he may have been if you count Malcolm X as being from Kansas, which is where his father was. The Little family was originally from Kansas. But the real choices for father are Malcolm X, Lolo Soetoro, who adopted him in Indonesia, Barack Obama in Kenya. There's, I know Carl Gallups has proposed this fellow from Indonesia who was running the cult that the woman from Hawaii who died was also in that cult. And again, I don't know how much of that is, counter intel. But if you look at the three possibilities, his proclaimed father, Barack Obama in Kenya, Muslim. His adopted father, Lolo Soetoro in Indonesia, Muslim. Malcolm X, of course, Muslim. And Barack Obama, by his own testimony and by his mother's testimony, went to an Islamic madrasa in Indonesia as a child by his choice and his demand. His mother wanted to place him in a Jesuit school. He insisted on going to the Muslim madrasa. And at that Muslim madrasa, he learned the Quran in Arabic. And that's why he was able to quote in Arabic. That's why he was able to give the Shahadadan in Arabic. That's why he was able to claim that the Muslim call to prayer is the most beautiful sound on earth. I don't know if you've ever heard that Muslim call to prayer, but it depends on where you are, and it depends on what kind of PA system they're using, right? I mean, I heard a call to prayer that was so bad, this guy couldn't sing at all.
Right.
And he was doing the morning prayer, and the Labrador across the street was so used to hearing it, he was giving it back to him, except the lab was singing better than he was, Anyway, And I can tell you, I'll tell you, Bishop, I'm not living under a Muslim call to prayer, okay?
I know that's
They
right.
want to start having...
Come on, Doc.
Yeah, you want to start having a Muslim call to prayer in my neighborhood, you better get ready for a competing version of Inagata Davida, right?
That's it. That's it. It's like a demon singing in soprano. No, get that thing out of here. Oh,
yeah.
You hear it gives you a migraine. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah, well, so I mean, so here's the thing: is that when if there was no significant Islamic presence in the United States prior to Obama, maybe 5% of the population, and I don't think most Americans had a big problem with the Muslim population. I mean, of course, Louis Farrakhan was fairly radical, but there are times when he's made a lot of sense too. And and as long as people weren't acting violently, I think most Americans could say, yeah, we can get along to go along here. But when you come in and you have Saudi Arabia buy up all the textbooks in this country, and then they convert all the history books to write history to say, oh yeah, the Muslims have always had a large presence in the foundation of the United States. When Barack Obama converted NASA over to a Muslim propaganda agency, which is what he did, and Obama goes on to appoint 7 members of the Muslim Brotherhood into his cabinet, which is evidenced by a letter that Michelle, I don't know why I can't remember her last name now, but she had written a letter to the DOD. She had written a letter to the DOD expressing her concern about 7 Muslim Brotherhood members being in the cabinet. And, of course, some of those were also covert. For instance, Jack Brennan at the CIA. Now, we know that Jack Brennan at the CIA had an operative hand with a UK intelligence agency for purposes of developing the dossier and for purposes of moving it through the ranks. You've seen that data. Jack Brennan. And Jack Brennan was openly antithetical to the presidency of Donald Trump and was taking steps inside the deep state to do what he could to thwart it, even after he was elected and even after he was elected by the Electoral College. The deep state and the Obama administration was doing extraordinary things like wiretapping. Now, all of this leads us back to, of course, the FISA Memorandum. It also leads us back to the crimes committed by the administration at that point, which are really the kinds of crimes that go to the destruction of the center of the social order. What isn't being said, Bishop, about this FISA memo is that those FISA courts are an outrage that they even exist.
Yes. Teach, man of God. Take your time.
Well, you have Article 3 of the United States Constitution, which says these are the courts that will exist in this country. And then all of a sudden we got this FISA court that is doing stuff ex parte to, allow all of these warrantless searches and all the surveillance stuff and, the end of habeas corpus and people being put away with no lawyer and, all the rights of the Constitution being suspended because we're under some kind of new emergency. Well, I want to ask you the question. We had let's just assume on the basis of the factual evidence that's been produced to us. Okay, there were 19 Islamic terrorists that struck the World Trade Center, 13 of which were involved with Saudi intelligence. Now, this isn't my story. This is the official story. Okay, so, wow. We've had the World Trade Center come down with the greatest terrorist attack in American history. All right. Where's that leave us? Well, probably what we should do is 7 years later, elect a Muslim to the presidency who can't prove he's an American citizen.
Right.
Right? And in the meantime, let's go ahead and abort all the protections that you used to have under the Bill of Rights. Let's get rid of all of those. A Nazi-style surveillance state to, quote-unquote, keep us safe. And in the meantime, let's go ahead and bring in members from the East German Stasi to consult as to how we should construct the new department, Homeland Security.
Well.
Oh.
Geez,
yeah, well, I'm sorry. I guess we didn't have enough intelligence agencies in this country that we need a new one now.
Right.
Okay. How secure did they make us? Well, we're going to put in scanners at the airport that will take, naked pictures of everybody that comes through the scanner. Okay. What's the truth on those scanners that were initially put in the airports? Highly radioactive, right? One shot was the equivalent of 7 X-rays. Organization was owned by former National Security Director Michael Chertoff. And those images that they took at the airport one click of the button, and they can count the pores on your skin.
Wow. Teach, Doc.
And so hundreds of thousands of photos of naked children were shipped off to their taskmasters in Belgium and the Netherlands that demanded those scanners. So we have to have these scanners in because people are known to put explosives on their shoes or to put on flammable underwear. Whoever came up with that idea. I don't know, if you're a jihadist. No, Bishop, come on. You're a jihadist, right? And you're sitting around in some dump, there. Maybe you're in East Berlin or maybe you're in Amsterdam somewhere. Hey, look, we want you to get on a plane and blow the plane up. Okay, I fight for the cause, Okay, great. What's your plan? Well, we got some flammable underwear here for you. Flammable underwear? You guys can't think of something better than flammable underwear?
Right.
Flammable underwear. Yeah.
Yes.
And so, okay, well, let's see, how are we going to pull it off? Well, go up there with no passport and take out some cash and buy a one-way plane ticket to New York. You shouldn't rouse anybody's suspicion doing that. In Amsterdam. Yeah.
Right.
And this is the story we're expected to swallow, right? And so he does this thing, and the next thing you know, all Americans have to be, strip searched at the airport because of this underwear bomber. And now that we're doing that, well, look, not everybody has to be strip searched at the airport because some people have religious objections to that. Well, who's that? Muslims.
See.
Oh,
right.
Right? Is this computing for anybody?
Come on now. Oh, boy.
I'm sorry. I mean, the absurdity of this, and that the American public just sits back and takes this stuff, And I told, when I ran for Attorney General out here in Washington, I made it very clear to the TSA, look, if I get elected, you guys aren't going to like me because I will come down with the state troopers, and I catch you in an inordinate pat-down, you're going immediately to a state prison.
Right.
And as soon as I raised that on the campaign trail, federal law, TSA is now exempt from being prosecuted under state law. Yeah. And so what you see is a mind control mechanism that has been put in place by the deep state to tell you you have no expectation of privacy when you travel. None. You have no expectation of privacy when you're on your cell phone. You have no expectation of privacy when you use any of the electronics in your home thanks to your smart meter. You have no expectation of privacy when you watch TV. You have no expectation of privacy when you get on Facebook. You have no expectation of privacy when you use your computer. Because Windows 10 has made sure that there is a keyboard reader, a keystroke reader, that's attached to the back door that goes immediately to the NSA cloud. And what does the Fourth Amendment have to say about that? Or what does the Fifth Amendment have to say about that? It has a lot to say about it. But who cares about the Fifth Amendment anymore? Obviously, the Supreme Court doesn't. And most assuredly, the FISA courts don't. The FISA courts use a technique where they'll say, okay, well, who's the defendant in this case? Oh, it's a computer.
Right.
Who's the defendant in this case? Oh, it's a bank account. Who's the defendant in this case? Oh, it's a building. Well, the building can't have representation here, so let's go ahead and authorize an ex parte warrant to set up a camera or set up a surveillance system or whatever and do that here, right? And in the meantime, the police are using this Stingray system where once they get your phone number, they can track you. I mean, I've seen that Stingray system abused so badly,
right.
where they decide they don't like a particular guy. And so, they're sitting around at the donut shop 10 o'clock at night in a small town. What are we going to do? I don't know. Let's trace this guy. Oh, yeah, here he is. Let's go do a SWAT raid on him and pretend we got a 911 hang-up call. Right?
Right.
Yeah. And they think that we don't know what's going on. Well, all of these abuses were put in place by, of course, the Bush-Clinton cabal, which opened the door for all of this stuff. But you get the final touches, if you will, by Barack Obama. Now, with that being said, you know, when we talk about Barack, a lot of times in intelligence circles when we talk about him, you have to understand the psychopathy of this individual. I mean, he was raised by terrorists. He was always in a CIA environment. He's always been in a covert environment. He doesn't know what his real name is. He doesn't know what his lineage is. He's been told this is who you are, this is what you do, and he's trying to find out who he is, right? But if you recall, there were a couple of things that happened in 2008 that can give you a clue as to who he is. One is he decided that he needed to do a campaign speech in Berlin, Germany.
Right.
Now, the last time I checked, people in Berlin, Germany can't vote in an American election. Right. What is he doing giving his speech there? And so he tells Angela Merkel, look, I want to speak, and I want to speak in front of the Reichstag. And she says, nope, that ain't going down at all. And the Nuremberg Tribunal's been torn down. You don't get to speak there either. Okay, all right. Well, I guess I'll speak in front of the statue of Nike. Now, wisely, he elected not to do the speech in German. Thank goodness. But he finishes his speech in English. He finishes his speech with the phrase, and this is my suffering. Okay, that's how he finished that speech. Now, in German, that phrase is, this is mein Kampf.
Oh, my God. Oh, repeat that again, Doc. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, my God.
He finished his speech in front of the Nike statue in Germany with the phrase in English, this is my struggle, or this is my suffering. And in German, that is, this is mein Kampf.
Oh, my God. Oh.
In Arabic,
Global Spiritual Revolution
this is my...
Go ahead, Doc. Oh.
In Arabic, it's this is my jihad.
Oh, wow. Please, Doc. Expose it. Wow.
Okay.
You're blowing my mind. Go ahead. Take your time.
Then he gets elected, and he appears where? In front of the Pergamum altar in Denver, under the white horse, Thunder. Right?
Okay. Right.
All right. Now let's take a look at that. Since we're talking about the white horse, Thunder, let's take a look and see if we have any scriptural support for this premise. Well, we have this little issue here in Revelation 6, verse 1. And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder. And one of the four living creatures say, come and see. And I saw, and behold, a white horse. And him that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him, and he went forth conquering and to conquer. Now, when you look at this word bow, right, he had with him a bow. You know, in Scripture, you know, I used to lead Spanish worship in a Spanish church.
Wow.
And we had a little discussion about this term bow, right? Because we kept getting the Spanish word arco. And so the pastor looked at me and said, you know, that can't possibly be right. And I said, well, you know, it's interesting because when you look at the Hebrew, you get this word kaseth, and this word is the word that you use for rainbow, right? It's the word that, you know, when Yah said, I'm going to set up my covenant in the heavens that I will never flood the earth again, and I will put a bow in the heavens, a rainbow, right? Well, that word for rainbow is exactly the same word you use for a bow and arrows. The same word. So when you get here, you're reading here, behold, a white horse, and him that sat on it had a bow, like a bow and arrow, right? But in the Hebrew, it makes no distinction. It could be a bow and arrow, or it could be a rainbow. So who was it that went out touting the six-colored rainbow all over the world?
Well, Go ahead, Doc. Teach.
Here you go. You have Barack Hussein Obama, who's got the rainbow. He's got the bow, and he's out here, and it's, LGBT until it becomes LGBTQ, until it becomes LGBTQRSTUVWXYZ.
Go ahead, Doc. You teach.
Well, you know what I'm saying here, Bishop. Right?
I'm having a great
but
time.
But here he is, right? So he has a bow. He has a bow, and he has a crown. Well, now this word for crown also is an interesting word because when we see the word crown in Scripture, we think, well, that's kind of like the Burger King crown, or maybe the crown that King Arthur wore. Some heavy metal thing with all the points. But no, that isn't it at all. That word there for crown actually means like a laurel wreath, right? Like what the Caesars would wear, a laurel wreath. Mm-hmm. Now, if you go back and you were to type in an image search off your favorite search engine on the net, and you put Obama Messiah in, you're going to see a picture of him standing there in a crucifix pose with a laurel wreath on his head. A laurel wreath.
Oh my goodness!
And so he has the bow, he has the crown that was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquer.
Right.
So you see that he's met this qualification of white horse. He's met this qualification of the son of sin and the man of perdition. He's met that qualification. He's met the qualification of the Assyrian who robbed the eggs, robbed the treasure, trampled down the people like Meyer in the streets, and no one raised a peep. Now, what about in Islam? Does he qualify in Islam as anything? Well, it's interesting because a couple of my friends who have been engaged in studying the Muslim Mahdi, including Joel Richardson and Walid Shubat and some other people who are quite knowledgeable on the subject. You have a lot of prophecies about the Sunnah and in the Quran talking about the Mahdi and in the Hadith. And the Mahdi has to have specific qualifications, right? He has to be rich. He has to be very powerful in the world. He has to lead the world into Islam, right? And there's other things too. He has to ride a white horse, and he has to carry the name of the sons of the prophet. Well, the prophet Muhammad didn't have sons. He had a daughter named Fatima. But Fatima had sons. And so whoever the Mahdi is, he has to carry one of the names of the sons of Fatima. Well, Fatima had two sons, and their names were Hassan and Hussein.
Wow.
Hussein is the spiritual leader of Shiite of Islam. Okay.
Yes.
So the Mahdi has to carry the name Hussein or Hassan. All right. Now, in addition to that, the Mahdi has to be coming on this white horse. Okay, now I just showed you how this white horse here in Revelation 6, right, that Barack Obama accepted the nomination under the white horse named Thunder in the Denver Coliseum on the facsimile of the Pergamum altar.
Yes. Wow.
Now, there's a passage that talks about Muhammad ascending to heaven, okay?
Yes.
And Muhammad's going to ascend to heaven from Jerusalem. He's going to ascend to heaven on a horse, right? Now, this is the discussion is that the horse came to him at night and got him. But this horse is a very interesting horse because the horse is covered with jewels, okay? Now, let me read this passage to you out of Ezekiel 28, okay, verse 13.
Yes.
You have been in Eden, the garden of Elohim. Every precious stone was your covering, the sardius, the topaz, and the diamond, and the beryl, and the onyx, and the jasper, and the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and the gold. And the workmanship of your tabrets and of your pipes was prepared in you in the day that you were created. Okay? You are the anointed cherub that covers, and I have set you so. You were upon the holy mountain of Elohim. That would be Mount Zion. And you have walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. You were perfect in your ways from the day that you were created till iniquity was found in you. Now, this is discussing, of course, the fall of the fallen watcher that we would call Satan, right? But
yes,
here you have this discussion, stones covering this, right? An anointed cherub. Now, this anointed cherub, this horse that supposedly got Muhammad, was covered with these stones and was winged, right? And he was winged, and he came and got Muhammad from where? The holy mountain, from Mount Zion.
Okay.
Now, what was the name of this horse of Muhammad that got him? The answer is Al-Barak.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, my God. Keep teaching, man. Doc?
So, our man who elects to go by the alias Barack Hussein Obama, Barack, the horse that carried Muhammad to heaven, Hussein, the son of Fatima, the son of the prophet, and Obama, which is Swahili for the name Usama, which means the lion warrior of Muhammad. And George Stephanopoulos is willing to testify to this day that Mr. Obama is a Christian. So,
even though he didn't know him in college.
Threshold, right?
Yeah.
Even though they were in the same degree program. It's like, man, you skip a lot of classes, like all of them.
Go ahead, Doc.
Well, anyway, so here you are. You can see that Mr. Obama is crossing the threshold here of really every criteria. Now,
yes,
did he try to take the United States into an Islamic republic? Well, of course he did. He declared us to be an Islamic republic, and he imposed the Jizya. And he put things in motion that still allows for a potential violent overthrow following the complete economic overthrow. Now, with the blessings of the Heavenly Father, we have an opportunity here to restate and restructure. As I mentioned to you before, Bishop, I believe that we're going to see a debt jubilee. I believe the debt jubilee is going to be declared here very soon, probably in the month of March, depending on what the markets do. Because the way it stands right now, we have over $1 trillion in auto loan debt. We have over $1 trillion in student loan debt. We have over $1 trillion in credit card debt. And there's over almost $3 trillion in mortgage debt outstanding. That's private debt in the country. In addition to the $22 trillion deficit we currently have going on the cash basis, and the unfunded liabilities of this country are over $200 trillion, while you're looking at a functional GDP in the $12 to $13 trillion range. I mean, that's the current condition. In 2 days from now, on the 16th, we will have the Chinese New Year. And on the Chinese New Year, on that day, China is going to launch the petro-yuan. And which means once that China launches the petro-yuan, they will be asserting the supremacy of the Chinese economy, the Chinese manufacturing base, and the Chinese currency to the expense of the American dollar. So this shakedown that you see going on the market right now, which is an absolute, the highest pinnacle ever seen in Wall Street history. And remember, what goes up must come down. That once you see this shift begin to come down, you're talking about a correction, just looking from the graphics of it, that shows a floor of average PE ratios right around a $3,000 Dow, not assuming for any correction below that floor before it recovers to the natural PE. So we could see substantial. We're talking about something in the range of a 90% correction over the next 2 years in those numbers. And if you recall, Bishop, we were talking about a little correction in Bitcoin. Was it a month ago? So we were.
Yes, sir.
Bitcoin was hovering at 15,000 or 16,000.
Yes.
And that's my personal feeling. But I do believe that if Trump takes the correct steps, and he's smart enough to do all of it,
yes.
if he takes the correct steps between now and March, and even if we walk into a debt jubilee, and this is going to, of course, reorganize everything, and you're going to see a lot of stuff become unavailable in this country. You're not going to be able to buy it anymore. You won't be able to buy foreign manufactured goods. They're just going to disappear. They won't be here because the dollar won't be able to buy anything. But ultimately, the dollar may recover, and over the long term, the economy will recover if the nation does not do what it did in 1932, which was to elect a socialist to take us into a protracted communist environment that would ensure that we will sit in a depraved state of economic stagnation until war is the only answer. What instead is necessary is that we need to walk through this thing carefully and maintain our focus on the American way of life that has basically a market economy. Protect our markets and let our manufacturing and industrial base grow, and we will recover, and we should recover in a relatively short period of time. But that's going to take the for lack of a better term, Protestant work ethic.
Yeah.
And we have to do it by the sweat of our brow, and we can in this nation, we can do this. So this is where, but in the meantime, a lot of this, and of course, we can talk from a theoretical point of view or an academic point of view, but there still is a spiritual reality to what is here. There's still nothing is happening in this country except by the hand of Yah. And remember, if he does not build the house, the laborers labor in vain.
Teach. That's it.
That's it.
And
so this is where the truly repentant and those who have said, okay, let us seek out the truth, let us seek out the way, let us seek out the life, let us find this rhythm of life that is here before us. Let us seek after righteousness. Now, we may not ever obtain righteousness, but let us seek after it.
Yes.
It's instead of asking yourself the question, what can I get away with? You need to ask yourself the question, do I have the courage and the spine to do the right thing, even though I could do the wrong thing and walk out of here like a bandit?
Right.
Do you have the courage and the integrity to do the right thing?
Oh, glory.
And, Bishop, we both know. I mean, when you look at, for instance, look at the corruption they found in Puerto Rico after the hurricane.
Oh, my God. Talk about that. Yes.
When you have a union refusing to deliver emergency supplies to people that are starving and have no water and no food, so that you can get a higher wage, you're corrupt.
Yes.
When you're working in a position where you're cheating the job over and over again, you have a fiduciary duty, and you don't do that fiduciary duty. Instead, you pander to the bottom line instead of the fiduciary duty, well, then you're corrupt. When I think about the court system in this country, pandering to publicly traded prisons, Did you know the state of Alabama was fined $3 million because they failed to fill the prisons?
Wow. Oh, man.
There was a judge in Pennsylvania that got 24 years, sentenced to 24 years in prison because he sentenced an innocent young man to go in this juvenile facility because the juvenile facility was owned by a publicly traded entity that needed that facility full, and he sentenced that kid to go spend his teenage years in that facility even though he was innocent, and the kid committed suicide. Now, if you're a judge and you're filling a jail because you have a contractual obligation to fill a jail. Let me just say this to those judges that do that. The judges that were being tried at Nuremberg for war crimes following the close of World War II, one of the Nazi judges looked at an American judge and he said, "How can you do this to me? We're both doing the same job." And the American judge looked at him and said, "You know, when you sentenced the first innocent man to jail, you knew this day was coming."
I saw that. I remember that. Yes. Judgment at Nuremberg.
Yes, and Nuremberg was one of the greatest things this country, you know, there were two things that were really great about this country, two things that really asserted our greatness over everything else that we've done. One was the Declaration of Independence, when we declared that the laws of nature and of nature's God were superior to the law of nations.
Yes.
And by that law, we declared our independence as a lawful independence. That was the greatest thing this nation ever did. And that was affirmed, the second witness to that was affirmed at Nuremberg, where the Nazis said, "Listen, American, Romans 13:1, obey the governing authorities. We're more moral than you. We were merely obeying the governing authorities." That's what we were doing. And that's what our moral code is, and that's what we were called to do. And we said to them, well, guess what? There's an authority that is superior to your government. It is the authority of the laws of nature and of nature's God, which is superior to the law of nations. We told you that back in 1776, and we're telling you it again here in 1947.
Yes.
And by that law, you will be convicted.
Right.
You know, so this is why when you look at this political reality, of what that is, we as a nation, you can't assert that law and say we have been blessed under the laws of nature and of nature's God to have this independent entity, that he created a nation here on really some of the most fabulous real estate in all the earth. And then we're going to despise that gift, and we're going to condemn that gift, and we're going to take that gift for granted, and we're going to treat the gift with disdain, and we're going to run up and down, you know, wearing pink hats and demanding rights without any sense of thanks to the one who placed us here, without any sense of thanksgiving for the one who established our shores as natural defenses.
Thank you.
Without giving any thanksgiving to the fact that we've had, you know, viable farmland that could feed this whole nation, and fresh water from coast to coast, and energy independence from coast to coast. All of these things that were America, and we don't give thanks for that, right? It's an arrogant people who disregard the truth. Now, when you go back and you look, and again, this becomes critically important to our political discussion here, because remember, we have a condition where Germany rose up really 3 times now. They rose up to create World War I, and they suffered brutally under the Treaty of Versailles. And so they flipped it into another turn, and they came back in a second convulsion to give us World War II. After being defeated in World War II and really having Germany bombed into rubble, come back to assert the Fourth Reich. And they brought their leadership into this country. We brought their leadership into this country to build the CIA, to build Homeland Security, so these things have taken over. Now, Barack Obama, when he got into office, he said, look, where those people are concerned, I either capitulate to them or I'm dead. He said that. And, of course, he was capitulating to them because his agenda was at all times Islamic. But he capitulated to the New World Order agenda, that is to say, the Fourth, which has always worked hand in hand with Muslim leadership. In fact, it was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem who recommended the final solution to Hitler.
Man.
So you see, I mean, now,
go ahead.
When you talk about Romans 13:1, right?
Yes.
In the Sefer, we have it written like this. Now, this is a big distinguishment from what Martin Luther said. Martin Luther said, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities." The governing authorities. He was very explicit that the nation state had the right to, you had to subject yourself to the nation state. But in the Sefer it says, "Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of Yahweh, and the powers that be are ordained of Yahweh." Now, if you're not of that power, you're not a legitimate power. If you're an occultist, or you're a Satanist, or you're a Luciferian worshiper, or you're an atheist, or whatever your claim may happen to be, and your power doesn't come from this source, you don't have any legitimate power. You have no right to govern whatsoever. Now, for those people who are ordained of that power, then verse 2, "Whosoever therefore resists that power, resists the ordinance of Yah, and they that resist shall receive unto themselves damnation." Okay, fair enough. "For the rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil." Well, if you're ruling and you are a terror to good works, and you are instead bringing evil, you again have no legitimate right to govern. And you have no ordinance, no ordaining from the legitimate power of the heavens. You are anathema to that power. And according to the laws of nature and of nature's God, and according to what we asserted at Nuremberg, and according to what we asserted in 1776, you have no lawful right to anything. And you most assuredly don't have a lawful right to kill anybody behind your enterprise. Now, you think about these people who are anathema, which is us. Scripture gives us a particular way. It says, this is the way. This is Mashiach saying, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Well, that means there's a way, there's a path that you're supposed to follow. There's a narrow path, few find it. Enter into the narrow gate, not the broad gate. Few find it, right? There are wise virgins that have oil in their lamp. And what is this oil? This is this teaching of Mashiach. This is this teaching of the commandments. The rich young man comes to him and says, "Tell me, what must I do to inherit the kingdom?" And he gives him the 10 commandments. "Do all of these things." And the young man says, "Well, these I have done from my youth." Okay, great. Now sell everything you have and follow me. Let's go. And the rich young man was grieved because he had much, right? But you see that the teaching is to inherit the kingdom, you keep these commands. And what's it say in Matthew 28? All power and authority on heaven and earth has been given unto me. Therefore, go and baptize all nations in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and tell them to obey all that I have commanded them. In John 10, he says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." In 1 John 5, it says, "This is the love of God, the keeping of his commandments." And so what you see is that the foundation of Western law, whether Americans, atheists, Protestants, whoever, whether they want to admit it or not, the foundation of all Western law came out of Scripture.
Yes. Oh, that's powerful.
You have no right to life except that it was written, "Thou shalt not kill." You have no right to property except it was written, "Thou shalt not steal."
That's right.
These things are critical and fundamental human rights that belong to every human being, born and unborn, old and young, poor and rich, ugly and good looking. It doesn't make any difference who you are. If you are a human being, you have those fundamental rights. And they're God-ordained. They're supernatural rights. And it is from these premises that when you see these people enacting laws like the deep state, you see Hillary Clinton. Well, no. In my opinion, if you try to come forward and talk about the Clinton Foundation, that's going to be the end of you.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't play along with our game plan. You don't pay to play. Well, we'll just bomb you, right? We came,
Right.
we saw, he died. Oh, that's hilarious.
See? Yeah.
Yeah, right? Well, that
Wow.
is no legitimate power. And, and I'm not the only one saying this. I have to tell you, Bishop, Judge Bork, who was supposed to be on the Supreme Court before he got quote-unquote
Yes.
Bork, wrote a couple of very interesting books, including Slouching Towards Gomorrah, where he sets out the premise in cold, hard print that the Supreme Court has no legitimate right to govern any longer. And any government that extols evil over the good, that tries to claim that night is day and day is night, that right is wrong and wrong is right, as Isaiah talks about, you do not have any authority under Romans 13:1, and you are not a legitimate government. And under the law of nations and of nations God, we have the right to throw off that government.
Yes.
Now, one other thing I wanted to say about this Romans 13:1.
Yes.
In January of 2009, Barack Obama, like Adolf Hitler before him, paid the churches in this country to interrupt their sermon series and teach Romans 13:1. There were churches around here that said, pastors were standing up and saying, yeah, you obey the governing authorities and you embrace Obama as our leader, and anybody who doesn't embrace Obama as our leader or criticizes him in any respect, you need to turn that person in. Pastors were teaching this. And what does it say in the Gospels? Children will rise against their parents, husbands against their wives,
Right.
wives against their husbands, parents against the child. Will turn each other in.
Yes.
So, again,
Wow.
when we look at this, so I'm going to kind of summarize this, Bishop. What we see here in the life and the persona of Barack Hussein Obama, i.e. Barry Soetoro, probably his legal name, British citizen, probably Indonesian citizen, probably an American citizen, doubtful. When we see who he is, you have to remember that no one has prosecuted him, and he specializes in putting third parties in front of him. He doesn't do the work. The third party does the work. That's his M.O. That's always been his M.O. He didn't bomb Libya and kill Gaddafi. NATO did. He didn't invade Syria, right? These mercenary terrorists invaded Syria, right? There's always a third person between him and the dirty deed. So he has managed to survive. No one's indicted him. He isn't facing any criminal charges. And in fact, my understanding is that the FBI has given orders that he's absolutely off limits. In other words, he gets to commit the crimes he committed, and he gets to commit the crimes he's committing. And there's no one here to stop it.
Barack Obama, I mean, oh, my God. And you know what, man of God, this, which especially when you said about when he spoke in Germany, oh, my God, and you broke down what he meant in German. It just, again, to our global spiritual revolution partners, I believe, and I said this the last time that Dr. Pidgeon was on the broadcast, he is the greatest teacher I have ever heard, especially when it comes to knowing the history, the origins of the American and global shadow government, the last days, the Antichrist and the sons of his spirit. And if I can just kind of piggyback on what you're saying and getting back to this again, as I said at the onstart of tonight's broadcast, that Barack Obama gave a speech in Kenya when he first got elected the first time. I believe back in 2010, he gave a speech in Kenya to a young a body of students, around, I would say, over 5,000. He says, I am the first Kenyan American president. He said that.
That's
He
right.
says, I am the first, not the first American Kenyan president, but the first Kenyan American president. And no one batted an eye. Not CNN, NBC, MSNBC, nobody. Oh my God. And so back in 2000, also in 2000, in 12, he signs this declaration. I wish I had more time, but this, and what you talked about, getting back, I cannot help but to think about that German speech. I mean, but he signed a declaration back in March 16, 2012. This lawful notice, the Declaration of Status document. Back in, again, March 16, 2012, President Barack Obama signing of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. Get this, of indigenous people, combined with Executive Order 13107, requires all persons, officials, trustees within the United States to acknowledge and to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples, including Moorish Americans. Why would he include Moorish Americans, as well as everyone else in America who claims and establishes their nationality are considered to be, quote-unquote, indigenous people? Now, back in 2012, Barack Obama had a painting of an African American by the name of this man was very well known, especially in Black history, in the Black community, of Noble Drew Ali. Again, Noble Drew Ali, and to all of our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, if you get a chance, examine his history. Noble Drew Ali, who was born Timothy Drew on January 8th, 1886, and died July 20th, 1929, under mysterious circumstances. And it came out some years ago in a FBI declassified manuscript that it was indeed his death came about not by cops, by the police force in Chicago, but by forces who later went on to create the Nation of Islam. And I know a lot of Black people is not going to like this, but later, and we have to understand that the Nation of Islam was birthed from this Noble Drew Ali, who founded, the Moorish Science Temple of America. And the Moorish Science Temple of America later became the Nation of Islam through another person by the name of W.D. Fard, capital F-A-R-D, or Ford, who was born in Hawaii. Isn't that interesting? And I know a lot of Black people are going to get upset, but this W.D. Fard, who Muhammad, as congregants of the Nation of Islam called him, was actually W.D. Fard, F-A-R-D or F-A-U-R-D, born in Hawaii, whose blood was of Polynesian mix. So who's that sound like? Who later founded the Nation of Islam. So the Nation of Islam was created by the Moorish Science Temple of America, a.k.a. Noble Drew Ali. And so Barack Obama, even today in the Moorish Science Temple of America, and mind you, the Moorish Science Temple of America is the oldest Islamic corporation in this country, going back to the early 1900s. And there is an FBI database on the Moorish Science Temple of America religious entity, including the Nation of Islam. So this Noble Drew Ali and his death under mysterious circumstances, And now this FBI declassified memo saying that W.D. Farard, or Muhammad, who disappeared in, 1935, was actually born in Hawaii. And that Barack Obama, according to Elias Bay, who is the head of the Moorish Science Temple of America today, Barack Obama is called the Black Sun, S-U-N, and the seventh seal of God. This is amazing. This is amazing. And so I know I'm going to get a lot of emails from black people who are upset. I do not care, because we have to expose this for what it is. And so with Barack Obama signing into law this United Nations Declaration of Rights through, I believe, the spirit of deception, bringing in this Moorish Nation of Islam mentality into the United States, and that he is called, you may mention that Barack Obama, by many people in this country, is looked upon as a Messiah. Barack Obama, according to Elias Bay, in the Moorish Science Temple of America today, is considered the Black Sun. The devil is a lie. And so I just wanted to expose that before we went off the air tonight, okay? And so I'm telling you, I just want to thank God for Dr. Stephen Pidgeon exposing the Obama conspiracy. And mind you, remember the comedy TV show, Amos and Andy? Remember, we were back in from 1933 to 1955? You notice that the founders, the creators of Amos and Andy, were both 33rd degree Masons, Charles Correll and Freeman Gostin, capital Gosden. Both of these men, Charles Correll and Freeman Gostin, who created Amos and Andy, were 33rd degree Masons. And if we remember that specifically, that in the main character in Amos and Andy was Kingfish, remember, who belonged to the Mystic Knights of the Sea. This was in Amos and Andy. And it was an attempt by the creators of Amos and Andy to really downcast Noble Drew Ali. This is according to a lot of black scholars. What they're saying today was Amos and Andy was an attempt to marginalize the works of Noble Drew Ali. But I'm saying Noble Drew Ali, W.D. Farard, the Nation of Islam, it's all demonic. And to our Global Spiritual Revolution partners, look at the history of Amos and Andy, Mystic Knights of the Sea, okay? And the congregants of the Mystic Knights of the Sea in Amos and Andy's, in the Amos and Andy comedy show back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, those congregants were called sardines, Mystic Knights of the Sea. I'm telling you, we've got to continue to expose the hidden works of darkness in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, thank you so much, sir. Any lasting words before we sign off tonight? Powerful.
Well, Bishop, I just want to give a word of warning that Mr. Obama being declared to be the Black Sun has its own significance prophetically. And as I mentioned, the painting shows him as the sitting president. Just keep that in mind.
That is so powerful. And can I add, too, I'm so glad that you brought that up, that the artist, Kehinde Wiley, Kehinde Wiley, look up his website, KehindeWiley.com. Most of his paintings show gay and lesbian people in the black community. The Washington Times put out an article a few days ago that shows many of the paintings of this Mr. Wiley of black women beheading white women. No outcry from CNN, no outcry from MSNBC or NBC. And that Mr. Wiley, in an interview in the 2012.
Hi, it's Jamie, Progressive's Employee of the Month, 2 months in a row. Leave a message at the... Hi, Jamie. It's me, Jamie. I just had a new idea for our song about the Name Your Price tool. So when it's like, tell us what you want to pay, hey, 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 and the trombone goes, blah, 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 and you say, we'll help you find coverage options to fit your budget. Then we just all do finger snaps while a choir goes, savings coming at ya, savings coming at ya. Yes? No? Maybe? Anyway, see you practice tonight. I got new lyrics for the rap break.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law.